So it's become obvious to me after doing several live streams that there are parallel running times, like AB time, thick time, flat time. There's so many different types of time. And all these are contingent upon the user, the operator, or those who are like NPC characters that interface and are operated upon. And the thing that makes it very prevalent and clear to me is the fact that I know, after applying myself through such ardent principle, practice, and will, and still coming up short much of the time, is that when you train, you are willing the food constituents into building up new muscle fiber and even muscle cells, hyperplasia. And that to push it and to know the limits and to begin to go with a flow and a feeling and an algorithm that you are writing upon and what it takes to do something, that laser focus can only be called free will. And I guess the difference is it's not free. You have to pay the price at some time in order to do that. Because what happens is you give that up for conveniences. But the question remains, and it comes back to this, is does everyone, that's anyone, not excluding any specific person, no matter what their mental capacities are. In other words, you have to start with not assumption, but a concept of supposing that we were able to look at a person as if they were like one of these old school equalizers, right? Where you see all the, it's not just treble and bass, but it gets into very intricate details. And if we could tweak this, tweak that, if somebody's mental capacities were really low, you would see the other areas that they would have to bring up through mental cognition, metacognition, the application and use of discipline, right, as an order, whereas somebody else may not have to employ discipline at all through genetics. They might just get up at 4 a.m. every morning because that's what their parentage, their familiar branch, their family did. I'm using free will right now. I'm focusing on a goal. I'm getting closer to that goal. And I'm expressing myself while I'm doing it. It's amazing when I do a live stream how few people understand that. But you also have people who in utero were exposed to a mother that was a professional runner. She could still be running 60, 80, 100 miles a week. Those kids come out running, come out swimming, they come out moving, right? They have to, and you can see, wow, if that took place in one and possibly say 3 or 4, let's call it uracil cycles, right? Like full cycles where you have the DNA, RNA replication in a whole lifetime through epigenetics to imprint that type of informational behavior in the genome, right? And to resonate that and radiate that out through those telomeres as if they're like a high-pitched frequency cymatic modulator, right? But you see that it dictates, like if that child born to the mother, the athlete, had a propensity for thought initially through the genetic code or genetic information, right? Which is an unlikelihood, not that they wouldn't have the attributes or the faculties to do that, but that it wouldn't be the dominant aspect to the personality or persona through expression, right? Or it would be a secondary trait. Because of the massive amount of time, skill, and maintenance and upkeep that the genetic prompt would imply, and that is that they have to keep running. They have to keep their blood cell count up. They have to keep that capillary bed density up. There's an internal will, if you will, that states they must keep moving, you know. And the same thing holds true to nervous system stressors, stresses and responses that turn someone into a thinker. And I'm sure Machiavellianism falls into the same categories, where it becomes a question of survivability. You know, it's like, are you going to survive? Well, you need to come out of the womb exhibiting these behaviors, you know. Is it as simple as keeping a bloodline going? Or does it have more to do with the will of the soul as to go through full development, right? And we look at the challenges that we're facing with our genetic propensities and how there's a chiral aspect to it, right? Where there is a copy or a mimic of the self, the right and left halves, but there may be such a dichotomy occurring there between the two halves that, like the analogy that I used with the equalizer, one side dictates or is dominant to the other side, and in order for there to be some sort of coalesce, some mutualistic function, certain things have to be muted at certain times at least, right? Because then you start getting into chronobiology, things that could turn into hedonism, where once you put discipline behind that, you're doing things like I'm doing right now, where you're exercising instead of just pleasuring yourself. That you understand that the ultimate pleasure that one can give themselves, from a more Epicurean sense, is to say that to deny yourself of carbohydrates and then force feed those carbohydrates and eating carbohydrates that you really enjoy, but having the discipline to stay away from them, or better yet, why not deplete them through the glycogen through exercise, right? And better still, why not push it an extra few days or a week to the point where you're so depleted that you're ahead, right? You're ahead of the game. The goal was to burn a massive amount of fat. You've done that, and now you can exhibit enjoyment, right? But what happens is there's a certain masochism that occurs where the animal begins to like the abuse, especially the fact that the master, right, the judge from Blood Meridian, lives within the same body as the slave, right? So you have the ability to tame the beast. And isn't that, once you become this all-encompassing power, you see that in people who are capable of using that refined, not the raw aspect, but the very refined, the defined, the developed will that Nietzsche, you know, hated the word system, you know, the epistemological approach, the ontological approach, but that refined one, that Ubermensch, that overman, right? And ultimately, the underground man, Dostoevsky, Letters from the Underground, Posts from the Underground, it's the same person, because the reliance on autonomy and self-efficacy, right, is of the utmost importance, and therefore the expression of this is who I am, this is what I do, but a forced notion through feudalism that you have to rely on the government, a kakistocracy, in order to get that supply, and you'll never be able to reach that supply. In other words, any expression of the individual self is muted. And even more so, those gallows are waiting for you over there.